It seems like every year there's a real threat of a
government shutdown.
Lawmakers racing to reach a deal to avoid a government shutdown.
And 2023 is no different.
Saturday, 11:59 p.m. deadline to avoid a government shutdown.
Here's why the government is constantly on the verge of a shutdown. For starters, the U.S. is the only country that even can shut down. Everywhere else, if a government agency doesn't have a budget for the new fiscal year, they just use last year's and keep working. But because 150 years ago, a bunch of U.S. agencies would blow through their entire budget, or appropriations, in a few months, Congress passed the Anti-Deficiency Act, saying it wasn't lawful to spend any sum in excess of appropriations made by Congress for that fiscal year. Basically, if Congress doesn't pass a new funding bill every year, agencies can't spend a dime and shut down. But why that keeps threatening to happen a century later comes down to Congress. For one, these spending bills are kind of their big thing.
The one thing that Congress has to do with the president is write the bills to keep the government open and working. There are a lot of measures that should be done or could be done, but this is the be-all, end-all of must pass.
So these spending bills end up becoming a vessel for all kinds of other things, like last year's. Sure, it funded things like the Department of Agriculture and Energy and the Department of Defense, but it also created the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force, renamed a bunch of post offices, and changed policy on the protection of whales in the North Atlantic, which environmental activists were adamantly opposed to.
Other things are going to catch a ride, and that's sort of the reality of living in a world where Congress struggles to legislate.
She isn't exaggerating. This is the number of laws that each session of Congress has enacted. Not only is Congress trending towards fewer and fewer laws, but so far this session, they're off to a really slow start. They're on pace to not even create 100.
If there's so few things that make it to the floor, it's the target. It's your opportunity to make a stand. It makes it harder and harder to reach those agreements in the first place.
In theory, they should be reaching those agreements with something called a budget resolution by about mid-April, but that hasn't happened in 20 years. Then they're supposed to pass those spending bills by the new fiscal year deadline, October 1st. Here's how many spending bills have been passed by then. It's been 26 years since all of them were done on time. They usually pass a short-term stopgap funding bill or a continuing resolution to fund the government for just a little bit.
And that's why it's seemingly that we come back in December quite frequently, and that's when the rubber hits the road for actually compiling all these final decisions on spending bills.
The ideological divide in Congress is growing. Republicans are more conservative, Democrats are more liberal. And then there's few members who meet somewhere in the middle.
Polarization exacerbates difficulties in the process here.
You can see it in split districts, too, where voters elected a representative from one party and voted the opposite party for president. Today, Congress is one of the fewest numbers of split districts in the last 100 years.
It reinforces partisanship. It makes it harder to reach final agreements where you have to reach across the party line. And it creates an incentive for speakers like McCarthy never to want to deal with the Democrats, but to deliver on behalf of his party's conference, not on behalf of what the Democrats want.
So a disorganized budget process, plus a lack of opportunity to debate things, plus a lack of motivation to compromise on those things, means funding the government is unsurprisingly a battle.
Look, I'm working everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen.